My name is Sarah Evanja, and I serve as the director of the Alliance for Science. I'm also a professor at the Boyce Thompson Institute for Plant Research in Ithaca, New York. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and to moderate this conversation around reconciling agroecology and biotechnology. So agroecology, of course, is a very popular term right now, especially coming off of the Food Systems Summit, defined broadly by many as an applied science that studies ecological processes applied to agricultural production systems. And so the topic that we're going to be talking about today is, can agroecology and biotechnology really complement one another? Can biotechnology be a part of that science that enhances the environment while also producing food to feed the many? So I'm so grateful for our hosts at the U.S. State Department. Thank you for pulling us all together today for this conversation. I do want to let everyone know out there that we are recording this event. And so you are essentially part of that recording. And we'll be able to share this and continue the conversation on social media afterwards as we share that recording out. I also want to draw your attention to the chat function on the WebEx platform. We really want this to be a very lively and engaging conversation, so please do get into that chat box, ask questions of the panelists, share your experience, share your stories. We want to hear from you. And we will be leaving a lot of time at the end of the session to engage in conversation as a global community. So please do use that chat function. We'll have that moderated Q&A after our speakers. So please stay tuned. And you'll see we have various Twitter handles on the slide that Marcella was sharing. We're also using the Food Prize 21 hashtag to keep this conversation elevated with the World Food Prize events this week. With that, I'd like to introduce and welcome our host today, Matt Murray. He's the Acting Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of State. We're so grateful for you and your colleagues to bring us together in this very important conversation. So over to you, Matt. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, Sarah, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'm still sitting here at my desk at the State Department in Washington, D.C., but I very much look forward to being in Des Moines on Thursday for the Borlaug Dialogue events there on Thursday. And as Sarah said, I'm currently leading our Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs here at the State Department. And as part of that, we also have our Office of Agriculture Policy, and many of my colleagues from that office, our Director Jeff Juke, our Deputy Director Marcella Szymanski, Paul Ferris, Dan Wald, and several others are on the line today. I'm very grateful to them for bringing us together. So our Bureau's mission here in the State Department is to boost economic opportunities overseas and thereby make America more prosperous and secure. And across economic sectors and spanning the globe, we advocate for policies that promote prosperity, resilience, equity, and inclusiveness. So I'm very happy to join all of you today. The State Department has a long-standing and close relationship with the World Food Prize Foundation, and the agricultural sector is at the heart of so many of our priorities. And this includes enhancing food security, combating climate change, and supporting our small and medium-sized enterprises. Our goal is to support American workers and families and to help citizens around the world build stronger, more resilient communities. The global agricultural sector is facing, as we all know, many difficult challenges. 1/3 of the world's population does not have access to adequate food. Conflict, COVID-19, and climate change are driving trends that threaten nutrition and food security around the world. As Norman Borlaug so accurately said, you can't build a peaceful world on empty stomachs and human misery. The impacts of the climate crisis are confirmed by science, and they are not limited to any one place. Whether you're in Iowa or on the other side of the globe, planting and harvesting seasons are shifting, rainfall variations and pest pressures are increasing, and severe weather events are damaging land, crops, and equipment. The climate crisis threatens the prosperity of farmers from Des Moines to the developing world. And evidence shows these impacts are particularly devastating for poorer populations, who in many cases are already struggling to feed themselves and on women in particular. There are many problems that need to be solved. The climate crisis demands that we innovate and give farmers around the world a diverse toolkit to adapt to climate change and to mitigate further greenhouse gas emissions. To address all three pillars of sustainability, we need all hands on deck and all tools available to us. Norman Borlaug spent his life solving intractable problems with science. He also worked closely with farmers and said, take the technology to the farmers. Agroecology, regenerative agriculture, and the use of biotechnology can all coexist and be mutually supportive of one another. As Sarah noted, our speakers today will lead us in a discussion of some of the tools available in this effort, from biotechnology to approaches that are often lumped together under the term agroecology. And so to begin the discussion, I want to turn the conversation back to Sarah, and she can get us started. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate those introductory comments and again for hosting us today. I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce each of our three speakers. I'm going to introduce them in the reverse order in which they'll be speaking. And then we'll just go ahead and launch into their brief presentations. And then we'll look forward to a conversation with all of you participating today in the end. So our final speaker will be Beth Bechdel. She is the Deputy Director General at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And in this role, she continues her long-standing service to food and agriculture, and now at a truly global scale. Beth is responsible for FAO's partnership and outreach work, among other responsibilities. Prior to joining FAO, Beth was president and CEO of Agronovus Indiana, the Midwestern state's economic development initiative focused on advancing the ag biosciences sector and developing 21st century talent. Prior to her leadership of Agronovus, Beth was director of agribusiness strategies at Indianapolis-based law firm Ice Miller LLP, where she helped build the firm's dedicated legal practice to food and agribusiness clients. She was also the former deputy director of the Indiana State Department of Agriculture. It's a big job in an ag state like Indiana. Beth's dedication to public service and agriculture and her extensive trade and farm policy experience started in Washington, D.C., where she served in key roles as chief of staff at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and as economist at the Senate Agriculture Committee. Beth excels at building unconventional alliances and connecting people, which is a very relevant theme to the topic we're going to discuss today. She was raised on a multi-generation farm in rural Indiana, received her bachelor's degree from Georgetown University in international law and international affairs, and completed her master's degree at Purdue University in agricultural economics. We're so honored and pleased to have Beth with us today. Our second speaker will be Dr. Walter Souza. He's an adjunct associate professor at Iowa State University, right here down the road from where we are in Des Moines. He teaches courses on genetics, biotechnology, and crop physiology in the Department of Agronomy. His research is on the genetic regulation of sterile metabolism in plants, with the goal of applying these findings to improve stress tolerance and nutritional quality of crops. In addition to co-developing courses for the ISU Distance Masters of Science and Plant Breeding program, Walter also served as the director of plant breeding e-learning in Africa for 8 years. And with that program, Walter helped to provide access to open educational resources on topics related to the genetic improvement of crops. Prior to his graduate training and work in academia, Walter worked for the World Food Program and UNICEF in Angola and Zimbabwe. And his roles with WFP and UNICEF were on food security and vulnerability assessment, all very relevant topics to our conversation today. And then finally, our first speaker is Naseed Maguana. He is currently a doctoral fellow with the Genetic Engineering and Society Center at North Carolina State University. This is a center focused on examining the science, the policy, and the public engagement aspects and impacts of agricultural biotechnology on food, energy, and water systems. Prior to joining NC State, Naseed worked with the National Agricultural Research Organization, or NARO, in Uganda, where he was involved in biotechnology education and outreach for smallholder farmers. Naseed is also an inaugural fellow with the Alliance for Science, so full disclaimer, the organization that I lead. And in 2018, he was a next generation fellow at the Breakthrough Institute. a global environmental policy think tank based in the Bay Area. He holds a Master's of Science from the prestigious Macquarie University in Ag Extension and Education. And his interest is really on the role of emerging agricultural innovations in transforming small-scale agriculture. This is the topic of his PhD thesis that he will be defending in May before he enters the job market. So watch out, world. Naseed, we're going to start with you. You grew up in Uganda. You've worked with farmers in Uganda as an extension officer for a long time. So please kick off our conversation and share your thoughts on how biotechnology and agroecology fit within the current reality of the farming context in Uganda. Over to you, Naseed.
Thank you, Sarah, for that sweet and kind introduction. It's with great pleasure and honor to be on this panel today discussing this very important topic. And I think both agroecology and biotech offer great opportunities to address threats to food security, not only in Uganda, but sub-Saharan Africa as well. And pitting them against each other in a binary frame of either or undermines the complexity of challenges surrounding smallholder farming systems. But I'll come back to unpack this later. Let me start with a brief personal story that informs the perspective I bring to this important discussion. Feeding the world has always been a huge part of my life since I was a kid. I grew up in a small town called Setamukono in central Uganda, which is about 1 hour east of the country capital, Kampala. And my mom used to run a small restaurant that fed almost the entire community. Not for free though, but at a reasonable community standards rate. And part of our house was the restaurant and the other half was the residence. And as a kid at the time, I used to be co-opted to serve as a waiter during peak hours in the restaurant. This was my favorite part, not washing dishes. And I remember one of the popular menu items in our restaurant, not that there were many anyway, was cassava and beans, commonly called katogo, which is also widely eaten across Uganda. Cassava, up to today, still remains a very important food security crop, feeding more than 13 million Ugandans every single day. However, this important food security crop that fed my community, that still continues to feed my country, is under major threats from viruses that are causing diseases such as brown streak and mosaic disease, which make it inedible for cassava to be eaten not only by humans, but also animals. And for the last 10 years, I've had the privilege to work with public sector scientists in Uganda at the National Agricultural Research Organization, who are spending day and night using all the tools in the toolbox to fix these viruses that are affecting this major staple. And I've also had the same privilege as an outreach and extension person to spend most of my time on smallholder farms, listening to farmer stories, learning about their challenges and how they are going about solving them. And I can tell you, these challenges farmers are facing are quite complex, very unpredictable, sometimes unique, and always evolving. And to me, they need no simple solutions, but rather more complex thinking rooted in the contextual realities of the farming systems in which these challenges are happening. And if any farmer today approached me who grows cassava, seeking out for the best option to grow that is resistant to the virus diseases. I would point them to biotech cassava as one of the most promising varieties that can help deal better with these virus problems. And I would also say that if anyone out there is really concerned about addressing these enormous challenges farmers are facing, we need to really be very keen on how appropriate the tools we are suggesting to these farmers are going to help, and whether these tools are not going to just, add additional labor burdens to farmers, or even perpetuate existing inequalities within the food system. Now, if anyone is wondering where I'm going with this, I would like to explicitly say, whichever your position is on biotech or agroecology, discussions on how best to deploy these tools should be best from the starting point on a clear understanding of the reality of the food security situation as it exists today in Africa. The threats to food security are quite dire, ranging from the changing climate to chronic pests and diseases, and now the cross-cutting issues such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Addressing these challenges needs not either biotech or agroecology, but both. And whichever version of agroecology one wishes to go with to address these challenges, whether it's the science, whether it's the practice of movement version of agroecology, let's not forget the science where this term came from. And put simply, at the core of agroecology is the science of growing crops or producing animals in relation to their environment, drawing on principles from ecology and agronomy. Now, if anyone wishes to expand that original science definition to include social and political aspects of the food system, beautiful, but that shouldn't mean excluding emerging advances in science that can potentially address some of the challenges that I've highlighted in this talk. And most importantly, the very science that informs agroecology can be used to guide us on how best to incorporate newer advances in science and how best they can fit in different aspects of agroecology. And I would like to end by saying that no one better reconciles such contentious issues in agriculture or farming as a farmer. And I wonder why even these two, agroecology and biotech, were made to seem like incompatible in the first place without taking them to the farmer first. And I would say, like how the great Norman Bohler said, take it to the farmer. And you'll be surprised that these farmers are smart in the first place, and they will choose the best of both worlds of biotech and agroecology, depending on what works best in their unique farming context. I would also like to say that it's very important we give farmers access to all tools there are in the world to help them deal with their different challenges they are facing. Let's put them at the center of decision-making in the food system and empower them with the necessary knowledge to help them make informed decisions to choose what works best in their various farming contexts. I submit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naseeb. Really appreciate those provocative comments to get us started today. And you ended with the importance of education. And so that's a great segue to Walter. We're looking forward to hearing your perspective as an African and as someone who thinks a lot about the education gaps that lead to missed opportunities in agricultural development. So Walter, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you. And I think, Walter, you wanted to show some slides, so it may take us just a moment to get those slides up.
Well, as we're working on the slides, thank you so much, Sarah. I'm honored to be a part of this panel. I'm touched by the powerful message by Naseed, absolutely connecting to the heart of the matter and the heart of Africa. So it's wonderful, and I hope that I'll be able to connect our stories in one way or the other and make it a lively conversation today.
Slides will be up in just a moment, but I'll just remind
Just a
everyone
minute or
this is a
two.
great time to put some questions to Naseeb in the chat that we can return to when we get to the discussion part of our program today. So feel free to use that chat box to get those questions down now, and we'll return to them soon.
Again, and as we are sharing the slides, I just want to say this is an honor to work for Iowa State, a great university here in Iowa, and wonderful colleagues and students and all the things about higher education that we get to experience when we get these opportunities. At the same time, I'm an individual and somebody who has roots in Africa, so I'm going to speak a lot from my story. And I'm going to make opinions that the opinions that connect with me. So I want to make that separation here clear and also acknowledge that, you know, we get an opportunity to talk when we are connected with such great organizations.
Okay, that looks promising.
Great. All right. So thank you, Marcella. And you're going to help me advance this slide. So I'll prompt you when I get to that point. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So let me start again. Here's about a story: biotechnology education through Africa. How did we get to even to have this title? About 9 years ago, I stood in front of instructors and students in a lecture hall at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. I was there to exchange ideas on collaborative biotechnology education. At the beginning of my talk, I asked this question: how many of you ate DNA today? Of course, the answer should have been everyone, right? Yet there were varied responses, okay? So when we eat fish, we also eat its DNA. When we eat banana, we also eat its DNA. When we drink water, we also drink microorganisms and their DNA. The air we breathe contains cells from others around us and their DNA. So genes are made of DNA. We eat, breathe, and drink DNA every day. Next slide, please. So yet I did not know this when I was growing up in rural Tanzania. What I knew then was that land features like what you see here on one of the pictures in this middle of this cornfield, maize field, this ant hill, what I knew then was these places could produce tasty snacks. Okay, so after the rain, flying ants came out, we caught them, we threw them in a hot pan. Of course, I did not know that eating those flying ants meant that I was also eating their DNA, right? So as a child, I did not understand why maize at the bottom of the picture here might be attacked by insects. The larvae that did that just looked disgusting to me. I was terrified by those insects. But my mom knew the consequence. So Naseeb and I shared about our mothers. My mother knew about the consequences of this. She started work before sunrise and she stopped at sunset. She worked hard to raise the 10 of us, right? Sadly, we sprayed DDT to control fleas and chickens in rabbit stalls. We dusted vegetable crops with fungicides, holding them with our bare hands. And weeding was heavy, heavy work, done manually, as you know, in smallholder farms. And after that, all that work, to have your crop destroyed by insects, to have the grain decimated by weevils, that must have been heartbreaking to my mom. Yet, you know, as a child, I did not have solutions for her. Next slide. And I grew up, okay? I grew up, earned a bachelor's degree, worked for the United Nations in Central Southern Africa. I traveled to communities in Angola and Zimbabwe to assess their food security situations. I met women heads of household, and when talking to them, I realized they too struggled like my mother. I knew drastic change was needed. I was convinced education was part of the change that was needed. I personally pursued education in the United States with the hope that when I gain this knowledge, I shall stay connected to my home and help in some way or another. Please, next slide. So my background is plant molecular physiology and biochemistry. I've isolated and studied genes involved in plant insect defense. I've overcame my fear of these scary organisms. They're battling plants continuously out there in the field, right? So I've analyzed DNA, I've analyzed messenger RNA, mRNA, I've analyzed proteins, I've created transgenic plants to increase expression of genes. I have created and worked with genetically modified plants in my research. So I want to tell you a bit about my research, please. Next slide. All right, so my current research uses maize to study the genetic regulation of sterols. We're also creating transgenic plants with modified sterol composition. I just want to let you know that insects do not make sterols on their own, so they depend on their diet. So if we are able, through genetic engineering, as I'm showing here, you don't need to know, this. If you know this science, fine, but just to tell you that if we are able to genetically engineer a composition that is not naturally found out there, that might help with an insect problem, okay? Next slide, please. So about 5 years ago, 4 armyworm descended upon Africa, decimated maize across the region. Local varieties didn't stand a chance. Could transgenic maize have helped? What about BT maize with genetically engineered insect resistance? Could that have been one of the tools to help fight this new pest? Next slide, please. So we write about these things, and in this paper here, we use BT maize as an example in a discussion about potential risks and benefits of GM crops. And these are our conclusions here. I'll read them for you. Risks associated with GM crops have proven to be low to non-existent. Developing nations, countries, would benefit from GM technology as one of tools to improve crop yields and reduce production challenges. So now you know where I stand when it comes to this issue of agroecology and biotechnology. Next slide, please. Yet more must happen to address the acute food insecurity in Africa and other parts of the world. You can see here in the center of Africa for many, many years, this place and beyond, there's been severe problems that Naseed eloquently explained that we need to think about that, influence food security. Next slide, please. My opinion and others. We need more investment to provide capacity for research and development, including training more scientists for Africa. Next slide, please. We tried that at Iowa State in collaboration with our partners at the University of Sub-Saharan Africa, and that's a broad region. I'm aware of how many countries are there. Okay, Africa is not a country, I'm aware. Okay, so it's a large, Sub-Saharan is large, but I'm just going to use that for the sake of this conversation. So the PBEA program, Plant Breeding E-Learning in Africa program, has delivered open educational resources in plant breeding, genetics, and biotechnology to hundreds of graduate students in that region and across the world now, right? We're trying. Next slide, please. Yet Africa is a young continent again. The median age is around 18 years. And with such a young population, projections are suggesting that there's going to be an explosion in population there, such that in 2100, 1 out of 3 persons on this planet will be from Africa. Next slide, please. That young population is an opportunity that we must not let escape. Young people are the future. We must invest in them. We must start even earlier than 18 years. We do that in this country, here in the United States. We're future farmers of America. We prepare youth for leadership and careers in agriculture. We do that in this country. Across universities, we have youth biotechnology outreach, young people coming to laboratories, spending time with scientists, get to play around with this DNA that initially we thought we did not eat, right? This is the future. These are the future farmers, scientists, leaders, and policymakers who will discern the right biotechnology for their people, for their nations. Next slide, please. The time is now. The technology is ready. Mobile devices are a fantastic opportunity to deliver educational content to young people. This is where, personally, I think this is the way to get to that truly marriage that is acceptable by a people of these technologies that we are proposing. And the next slide, please. So, the future of biotechnology in Africa is in the hands of Africans. Naseed has presented that so clearly. I'm inspired by this. They're the ones who must decide what's best for their nations. But we can't just leave them alone. Let's work together to empower, support them, empower them to feed their own communities, their own people, their own families. Next slide, please. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Walter, and thank you for sharing not only your professional expertise, but also your personal experience on the ground from your home country of Tanzania. And I know we have some participants from Tanzania out there today that are sharing their story in the chat box. So great to see that. Our final speaker today is Beth Bechdel. Beth, thank you so much for joining us today all the way from Rome across the Atlantic. As a leader of the UN FAO, you have a global view of these conversations happening around biotechnology and agroecology. So we very much look forward to your perspective. Over to you, Beth.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And I definitely want to say thank you to all of the organizers for letting a Boilermaker come into this very important event in Iowa. I know that sometimes we compete a little bit with each other, both in the agricultural classrooms, but also on the football fields. And it's very nice to be part of such an important overall event, bringing us all together to talk about, I think, the very important issues of hunger and food security, food insecurity, and again, this very important topic of reconciling agroecology and biotechnology. And I very much have enjoyed hearing both Naseed and Walter's comments. And in fact, hearing both of them, I've sort of even pivoted a little bit in my own comments, and I'm going to go a little bit probably more off the cuff, I think, than following some prepared script. So let me again thank the State Department, Sarah, you as well, for bringing us all together and for the opportunity to speak on behalf of FAO. FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, is a specialized agency of the UN. We have 13,000 people across 130 countries. As Sarah mentioned, our headquarters are here in Rome. I serve as Deputy Director General, one of three, and a part of the leadership team, really trying to, I think, bring some new ways of working in this organization. And then to also, very importantly, support the work that does happen in the countries at our field level to make sure that, much as Naseed mentioned, that front of mind for us always is the support that we can provide to smallholder farmers, to those who are most vulnerable. And so ensuring that we bring, I think, very thoughtful guidance, and that we bring the power of our ability to convene and facilitate very important discussions around innovations and technologies and policies and regulatory frameworks and knowledge and expertise and standards is all very important to the work that we do. These particular discussions, though, are especially timely as we consider the follow-up to the UN Food Systems Summit that just took place in September, and as we also prepare for the biodiversity and climate change COPs that will take place very soon. And so thinking about the importance of innovation, the importance of tools in agriculture is incredibly timely. It also is very timely for FAO because we have just articulated, had adoption by our governing body, our FAO Council. So that's all 194 members who support us, the member countries, the member states who participate in FAO. We've launched our new strategic framework, which is a new 10-year strategic plan for the organization. It takes us from 2022 to 2031. And the framework puts at its very center this objective of what we say is leaving no one behind. And we do that through the support of efficient, sustainable, inclusive, and resilient agri-food systems. And more importantly, I think this framework is anchored on 4 aspirations that we see are necessary for not only current, but also future generations. And these are better production, with production as the foundation, which leads to better nutrition, which can lead to a better environment, and ultimately leads to a better life for everyone. We have committed as well to ensuring that we focus on, very importantly, how to help producers produce more with less, while balancing, very importantly, the trade-offs that exist between economic, social, and environmental sustainability. And this increased production will have to be achieved while we minimize environmental damage and protect our biodiversity, as well as conserving, preserving, and restoring the planet's ecosystems. I would say here today that agroecology and biotechnology tools are both unique approaches to meeting the significant increases in our food needs of the future. And we know that we are also not on track to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Very sadly, the data and the statistics around poverty, around hunger, around climate, around other very important indicators are sadly going in the wrong direction. And so this means that all of us are going to have to step up, be more innovative, be more people-centered, and be more environmentally conscious than I think we have ever been before. It also means that we're at a time where we're going to have to all demonstrate, I think, greater flexibility and adaptability. And COVID-19 and a global pandemic has certainly shown all of us the vulnerability and the fragilities of global agri-food systems. And it's underlined for all of us the need for more efficient, I would say more green, more inclusive, and perhaps even shorter value chains to ensure that we have a safe, affordable, and nutritious food supply. We can't lose sight, though, of the importance of innovation. And very excitingly, here at FAO, we have really taken on and much more fully embraced the concept of innovation than we have as an organization in the past. We have, in the last 2 years, created under our Director General's leadership a few new important organizational roles that I would just mention here as I have the opportunity. For the first time, FAO has a chief scientist as a part of its senior management. And Ismahena Wafi is that person. She joined us from the International Center for Biosaline Innovation from Dubai, and brings a really terrific perspective on the importance of science and evidence-based innovation and perspective to the work that we do. We also created a dedicated Office of Innovation. And this too is an important opportunity for FAO to really elevate the importance of not only technological innovations, but also social and policy innovations that are important for the work that we do in that global context. And so in many ways, I think we can all look at innovation as something that will help us achieve a number of these high level and global targets that we have identified. And as we think about one of the major outcomes of the Green Revolution in the 1950s and 60s, we saw it was an investment in research and technology transfer. And that's what enabled the agricultural sector to match the growing demand for food and fiber and feed. But I think it's also important as we have these really open and candid discussions that we also acknowledge that trade-offs came with the Green Revolution, particularly with regard to environmental outcomes. And I know I am stating the obvious when I say that now, half a century beyond the vision and achievements of Norman Borlaug, whose vision is what brings us all here today, the world has been dramatically transformed since the Green Revolution, and we are indeed facing new challenges, new concerns, and new social dynamics even that actually must be a part of this conversation. So as we think about maybe sustainable practices throughout our agri-food system, one thing that I think is very important to express is that we need to instill a culture of sustainability so that the word sustainability doesn't just become what we consider to be another buzzword or buzz term in agriculture. And one of the ways that I think we can do this is through promoting sustainable agriculture and food production based on many of the best practices and even guidelines that are produced by FAO as an organization. For example, the internationally agreed 10 elements of agroecology do indeed provide a holistic framework on redesigning agriculture and food systems. We worked hard to ensure that we bridged normative and operational dimensions and to look broadly at those elements to support production, distribution, economic, and governance aspects that ultimately can bring farmers' decisions towards sustainability. And when it comes to biotechnology, on the other side of this coin, FAO is also working very closely with key biotechnology partners, trying to identify the ways that we can bring those innovative tools and products in a very contextualized. I really liked Naseeb's comment. It's really about context. It's about location, and it's about the right tools and the right products and the right solutions in the right places. Some of these solutions have, we know, already shown enormous potential to increase food production and improve the delivery of plant nutrition and improve integrated pest management options, even improve soil health and reduce environmental pollution. We are also especially excited about the next generation of gene editing technologies that can be used, I think, very importantly in ways to improve plant and animal populations. The versatility that I think can come from techniques like gene editing could also very much be, importantly, an opportunity for us to continue to navigate some of the consumer and governmental and public policy related concerns that continue to circle the topic of genetic modification and genetic engineering. I would also sort of bridge this by saying that perhaps one of the areas that we might consider when it comes to approaches to more sustainable agriculture is that perhaps we begin to change our discussion towards what we might consider to be climate smart agriculture. And these will be important practices that I think both mitigate climate change, but also help us adapt to climate change. We can't have a discussion about addressing the climate crisis without focusing on both mitigation and also adaptation. And in both of these areas, agroecology and also biotechnology practices have very important roles to play. It's also important to note, I think, in this overall discussion, how critically important it is to ensure that we include a myriad of partners in developing these solutions, in advocating for these solutions, in promoting them, and training farmers at all levels. And for us, we recognize more than I think ever before as a global organization the importance and the prioritization that needs to be given to bringing partnerships with the private sector into this space. It is very clear for FAO that as we look forward, we recognize that the private sector, and private sector meaning small, medium enterprises, national companies, producer organizations, global multinationals as well, but the private sector has an opportunity to really play a significant role here to help us best leverage these new agricultural innovations and technological advances. We have just completed a new engagement strategy for future private sector partnerships at FAO, a new roadmap for how our organization will collaborate with private sector partners going forward. And it's critical for us that we, one, make sure that these engagements are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, that two, these engagements are also country-owned, country-led, country-focused. This is not about instruments, memorandums of understanding, and photo opportunities for organizations to come to Rome and find a way to partner with the UN or the FAO. These have to be action-oriented. They have to have very concrete approaches to how a private sector enterprise can really make a difference at that farmer level and in the field. And much of this, I think, will relate to, again, opportunities to really bring digital tools, innovation tools, data, and other kinds of systems into these countries that are most in need and are supporting the most vulnerable, to ensure that we also, I think, bring as many resources and as many capacities as we possibly can to those who are most in need. So let me just close maybe with a few observations and say that from our perspective, I think when it comes to making our agri-food systems more sustainable, the potential solutions to me almost seem endless. It's not even the two topics that we are talking about here today, but it encompasses so much more. And no one stakeholder has all the solutions, and no one solution will bring the economic, social, and environmental sustainability that I think we are all seeking. So the collective will of all of us gathered here today to implement innovative solutions for the public good is really a precondition of achieving truly sustainable agri-food systems. It will be given further impetus, I believe, with important upcoming events like the Nutrition for Growth Summit, and as I mentioned, the upcoming COPs for climate change and biodiversity. But let me be very clear here, perhaps with my closing comment, which is FAO is fully committed to engaging with all stakeholders to facilitate innovations that deliver meaningful and impactful solutions for people and for the planet. And I do, once again, Sarah, and to the organizers at the State Department, really applaud you for bringing us together around what, I won't say sometimes, what has often and frequently been viewed as a very divisive and almost controversial set of issues. It is important for us to have these discussions together, and it is important for us to sit together, unfortunately virtually, still at this time, hopefully in the future in person, on these important and strategic agri-food systems topics. And so FAO, again, very pleased to be a part of the discussion. I think, again, I want to just reinforce that many of you, I hope, are seeing maybe a more dynamic and a more engaging and maybe a more proactive FAO than perhaps you have seen in the past. And we do very much want to be a strong collaborator, a strong convener, and a strong facilitator of these very kinds of topics. So thank you again for the invitation, and I very much look forward to the discussion to follow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. I really appreciate those comments and for making it more personal, throwing out the script. I always appreciate that. So, I mean, you just talked about how, you know, the FAO is really interested in engaging with all stakeholders, with all people. And of course, we're just coming off of the UN Food Systems Summit, where urgent challenges to the food systems were discussed. It was billed as the People's Summit. And I was very pleased to see that the voices of youth were present. In fact, just last week, the co-chairs, the youth co-chairs of the Food System Summit addressed the Global Youth Institute, which of course is running alongside the Food Prize this week. And so I want to talk about youth. It's my observation that young people today are very technology embracing, perhaps more so than the social influences of the past. Youth around the world feel an urgency to address the big challenges, from the climate crisis to broken food systems and all of the relationships therein. And indeed, Naseed is representative of that youth perspective. So Beth, what are you hearing from the youth that you are engaging in addressing the food system fixes?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think you are exactly right. And in some ways, I feel like it was an important point that I probably left out, just the importance of making sure that we do really think about the power of the next generation to influence this type of agri-food system transformation, and to really encourage them to be very active and to support not only the kind of change that we're trying to bring about in food and agriculture, but also to support those who are most in need, and to really, I think, bring greater awareness to a number of these very important global challenges. I think many of us, at least my generation, with a future leader as a daughter, I think a lot about what we are leaving them in terms of the challenges that are here. And, you know, we think a lot as well about, this is probably going again a little off script even more, but coming from outside of the UN system and having come from the private sector and a number of the other experiences, Sarah, that you mentioned in my opening, there has rightly so been quite a bit of criticism of the global multilateral UN system about a lot of talk, a lot of words and a lot of phrases about what needs to be done. And oftentimes we can be accused of lacking in action. And I think the Food System Summit, FAO held a World Food Forum just a few weeks ago that was really about rallying youth around this area of change. And I think there's a shift taking place here. And what we're sensing is that young people are exploring, they're using their voices more loudly, but they're also trying to understand and learn all of the different issues that exist in food and agriculture. So, you know, when I have conversations with young people, I will hear, you know, very strong reactions about the importance of bringing these kinds of agricultural and biotechnology tools to, you know, countries in Africa, much like Walter's presentation supported. On the flip side, I will also hear from other youth who may very strongly feel that genetic engineering or the tools of biotechnology are inappropriate or not things that we should be pursuing for a variety of reasons. And I think what we all need to do as educators, as leaders of organizations, as academics, as farmer organizations, as public policy leaders, we need to provide them with as much information as we possibly can. We need to give them the tools that will allow them to assess and analyze and make some of these decisions and determinations on their own, and they'll find their path. But the most encouraging part, I think, Sarah, is that there is so much interest in these socially driven topics right now from young people, and shame on us if we don't capitalize on that and encourage them to be even more active and more bold with their perspectives and their voices and their actions. Well, it will be a hugely missed opportunity for all of us.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Beth. I want to stick with the theme of youth for just a moment and turn to you, Walter, as you work with youth every day there at Iowa State and around the world. So we have a question here from Alexis. And Alexis writes, as youth are ever more removed from the agricultural process, and we can talk a little bit about that too, what are the suggestions for increasing transparency in the food system in an accessible manner? Thoughts on that, Walter?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, that's a good question. And when it comes to even recruitment nowadays, as we see, and again, it's context dependent, and I'm talking from working here at Iowa State, where we don't have students just from rural parts of Iowa. We also have students from urban parts of Iowa, right? And other parts of the country. And so how do you get those students to come and join an agricultural department or a college? Is again, that information reaching out to them to inform that there's this field of agriculture with a lot of potential within. So there's a little bit of an outreach work, but also a need when the students arrive as educators to spend time with them, for them to get to know what we do, what drives us, our passions. When we teach our classes, what is the big picture, right? I'm teaching a class right now on world food issues. I mean, that's a monster of a topic, because where do you start? But if we can put the students together in teams and say, we have these problems here, maybe ethical issues, maybe the COVID-19 pandemic. Where do you see food moving from one region to another? Work together as a team and come up with a solution, right? I know that's just one of the approaches. I mean, there are many approaches as teachers to, as Beth beautifully said, to get these young people to see the issues and make decisions for themselves. I mean, they'll find their path, absolutely, I agree. But we need to provide that kind of a pointing to the moon kind of thing, So yeah, I hope that question, my answer helps here. But it's a good question, Alexis. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Walter. We've talked about, obviously the theme of this session today is agroecology and biotechnology. Beth suggested that the potential solutions seem endless. There's so much more than just those two tools and approaches, that no one solution will help us achieve food security and do that in a sustainable manner. But we are talking about agroecology and biotechnology today. So I want to turn to Holly's comment and question here in the chat. She says, I like Naseeb's idea of using the principles of agroecology to inform our development and deployment of biotechnology. Do the panelists have ideas about other tangible ways or examples of moving these two tools or approaches forward together? So any tangible, concrete thoughts on that? Naseeb, did you want to expand on our thinking here?
That's a great question. I would say, yes, there are definitely potential ways to see how, new advances in science can fit within the different versions of agroecology. I've actually, as an extension worker, taken time to familiarize myself with all these different definitions on agroecology. And my job tells me not to take sides with anyone. And I always look out for how does each version of agroecology fit the different farming contexts that I've come to experience. And I would say when it comes to places like Uganda, where actually already what is happening in terms of farming is not radically different from the core principles of agroecology. Farmers are, not monocropping, where the richest farmer is like someone who has more than 2 to 5 acres, which is a joke in places like here in the US. And so all I'm saying here is that when you look at the recent advances in science, especially in biotech, and you look at the challenges that are happening in places like Uganda, for example, with cassava farmers, I would say biotech tools that are being used to develop like cassava are not in any way going to radically change how farmers still grow these crops. And it takes me back to the issue I was talking about, that we need to look at biotech also on a case-by-case basis, because there's this whole notion that all biotech is created the same, corporations. And I would argue that, okay, if you are opposed to biotech because of the corporations that are greedy, how about if I told you of public sector scientists in Uganda who are developing these tools tailor-made to the contextual problems of the farming systems? Yes, we need to really have this very honest conversation when we are starting to think about how to deploy biotech. And because also biotech is not a homogeneous entity, just like the farming systems in which we want to deploy it into, they're not also homogeneous. So we need to have that very nuanced approach of like, okay, this is the problem, which best of biotech can address this problem in a way that doesn't radically disrupt the existing farming systems where this challenge is happening. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Naseeb, and I appreciate you introducing the word nuance into our conversation today. I think that's a key point. Another word that hasn't entered the conversation today, but Peter brings it to us in the chat box, is the word organic, which of course is another buzzword we hear in these conversations around food and agriculture. So Naseeb, I want to stay with you for a minute, and other panelists can jump in too if you like. Peter says, to me, it seems that the problem is agroecologists rejecting biotechnology and insisting on organic farming. Can you suggest how we can change the viewpoints of agroecologists given the publicity pushed by groups that oppose biotechnology? So how do we fold organic into this, Naseeb? What is the relationship between organic, biotechnology, and agroecology? Let's bring in another term.
Thanks, Sarah, and that's a great question. And I would like to start by saying there's no easy answer to this, because people form beliefs from, different, worldviews. And I would be very careful to want to even change anyone's deeply held belief, because in most cases, it can even backfire. The more information you present, it might just reinforce whatever they're believing in already. But I would like to say that if anyone is really thinking about organic as the best way to, transform food systems, beautiful. And I would say that if what makes someone side more with organics is because of their love for the environment, I would say beautiful. How about if I told you about biotech, which is sort of developed in a way that minimizes impact on the environment? And I would pick out an example of the BT maize. I was privileged to be part of the team that was developing the drought tolerant maize for Africa. And one of the tools of biotech that was being used to develop this maize was to make it not to be sprayed, like for the crop to rely less on pesticide. And I think this is a beautiful principle in organic farming where you don't want to rely on pesticides. So to answer the question of how do we change the minds of agroecologists, I think it's through having honest conversations like these, to be like, we are not actually enemies. No one wants to see a starving world. No one wants an unfair, food system. But it's just us maybe misunderstanding each other and having conversations like these that make people to be a little more introspective about their deeply held beliefs, maybe might be a starting place to be like, maybe I'm wrong about all GMOs being led by corporations. There are GMOs that are led by public sector scientists. There are GMOs that are environmentally friendly. And how best can they fit within the existing farming systems and the challenges that happen in those systems? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Naseeb. Great insights, and indeed, it's important to listen and realize that oftentimes people who are pushing different views actually want the same end point. So it's something to keep in mind. I want to turn to a question from Ashley, and Beth, I'm going to ask you to address this one. She wants to talk about partnering with all stakeholders. You talked about in your comments the need to engage and the desire for FAO to engage with all stakeholders. So Ashley writes, some stakeholders are huge multinational corporations, and some stakeholders are small, medium enterprises and small scale farmers. Those stakeholders have different objectives, motivations, and levels of power, resources, and capacity. For example, it is in big agrochemical corporations' interest to gain even more influence over the seed markets through continued mergers and acquisitions, whereas monopoly control is not in the interest of smaller seed companies or small farmers purchasing those seeds. So the question, how do you partner with everyone in a way that doesn't reproduce existing inequalities? And when the interests of those stakeholders are in conflict, then whose needs will you prioritize? Beth, I'm going to ask you to tackle that big question.
That's a big one, and it's got a lot of layers to it, but I really appreciate it because it has been a very important consideration for us as we have really stepped in more, as I said earlier in my comments, proactively as an organization into this space of engagement with the private sector. I will just say to this group, it was not without a lot of concerns raised and cautions given to us by our members about how to engage with the private sector for many of the same, I think, risk-related concerns that Ashley has raised here. And so we've worked really diligently inside our organization to ensure that we have a really clear and transparent, what we call a due diligence or risk mitigation, risk management approach to how we as FAO will engage with the private sector going forward. That means we aren't signing agreements and jumping into engagements sort of left and right. It's not about the quantity of them. It's really about the quality of these future collaborations with the private sector. And believe me, we're almost taking them one by one by one by one, really trying to ensure that the focus of the partnership, the work plan that it's supporting, that it ties to these same very important priorities that we've talked about, whether it's in Uganda, whether it's in Guatemala, whether it's in Syria or some other, sort of challenging location. We're really trying to make sure that we have a very balanced approach to how we engage with the private sector. We have a very intensive risk assessment process that measures by a number of ESG related standards, UN principles. We have exclusionary criteria, almost to the point that in some ways the counter to this is that it still seems very difficult for many private sector enterprises to actually collaborate with FAO still. And so we're trying to find that balance. And one of the things that I would say is that we are very much proactively, especially with our colleagues who are at the country level and at the regional level, encouraging them to identify those local partners, the SMEs, just as Ashley mentioned, as opposed to the global multinationals, to really sort of find those, I think, ways to partner. One of the things or the areas that I'm also extremely excited about that FAO is getting more involved in is support and engagement with entrepreneurs. And this is where I know Iowa State, my alma mater of Purdue, there's so much really exciting work happening, and it's not just in US land grant system entities, it's all around the world, and institutions and organizations who are really encouraging creative startup innovation to come. And the number of events that we've been able to be a part of, who you're realizing this entrepreneurial mindset that's bringing innovation and new kinds of approaches, products, services, technologies to these solutions or to these challenges, is also exactly the kind of engagement or partnership we want to have. Because oftentimes, I think when you find an entrepreneur, even more so than a global multinational, the entrepreneur is usually quite nimble, quite agile, has that ability to sort of adapt to a particular context or a particular setting. Multinationals have structured corporate priorities, R&D budgets, R&D pipelines, and it doesn't mean that they can't deviate or navigate from those. But there's a huge opportunity, I think, in partnering with many. And I guess maybe just to kind of button it up, for us, we are being incredibly mindful of these kinds of trade-offs that Ashley has raised, and are really trying to make sure that at the end of the day, what it is that we're focusing on is not the image or the appearance of a partnership, but it's about real, tangible deliverables. And if an entrepreneur can bring that, or a global multinational can bring that, or a women-owned, national enterprise business can bring that, then those are going to be the kinds of engagements we're going to explore.
Thanks, Beth. That's really inspiring. And I'm glad you brought up the importance of entrepreneurs in this conversation. Walter, there's a lot of talk in the chat about the importance of education. And of course, in your talk, you emphasize the importance of education. But I wonder if the tension between agroecology and biotechnology is not a lack of education, but rather that the juxtaposition of biotechnology and agroecology has become political or tribal even. So how does the debate at the grass top, say at the UN level, compare to attitudes at the grassroots among farmers and NAR scientists who you engage with in Africa, for example?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's a packed question. I just want to say this, unfortunately, Sarah, a lot of things can be political, and sometimes you can get to the everything, right? But I just want to share here from just my experience working for the UN, couple UN organizations. FAO, WFP, UNICEF, WHO, they continue to save lives. I've seen that firsthand. I worked in Angola. I was part of this country crop assessment missions with FAO colleagues, and we travel on roads that were still being demined, and we were removing landmines. We're getting to the fields that most of these fields were still had landmines. But we assessed the food security situation. We made recommendations. The family were provided food assistance to the best of our ability. So I'm hoping that debates that at the level, this you call it grass tops, at the UN level, continue to be transparent, as Beth said, continue to be transparent and respectful. And I'm hearing that from the tone of this strong and powerful message from Beth. And this is what we did at the country level. We were trained as employees to get permission from the local authorities before we spoke to their constituents, before visiting the fields, before we explained how it should work. We asked questions. We strive to remain transparent. So I hope that continues, right, at the top. And again, you can flip this plant analogy to which is the roots and which is the grass tops. I'm going to just get there in a minute. Let me talk about the local level. Need is always going to win. So if ag exports are impacted negatively by biotech, it won't be adopted. If this country depends on sending my food and be bought by another country, if the farmer, give them a variety that tastes bitter and it's not as delicious, it won't be adopted. So it's this context issue that Naseed brings. Like, if it's going to increase the management demand, then why should I go for that when labor is such an issue, right? So the local level, social, economic, institutional, market setting will matter, right? But I just let me ask us to think for a minute. So the scramble for Africa happened around 1880. That's 100 years after the United States got its independence in 1776. And this scramble continues in 100 years, and maybe maybe less than 100 until the early 1900s. Okay, so Liberia gets its independence around 1847. Africa has 54 countries, but Republic of South Sudan just became a nation in 2011. Right? So most African countries, and you can argue here, are just going to be general, around 1960s, that's where they get their independence. The bottom line is that Africa has barely been independent. Angola is just 46 years old. Zimbabwe is 41. Tanzania is 60, right? In the United States, we are 245 years old. We've made a lot of mistakes. We've tried a lot of different things, right? So what does it mean? What I'm saying here, I'm trying to say this. Africa is still navigating. I'm independent. Where am I taking my people, the destiny, right? And what does that future look like? I just want to come back to this. The future, of course, is better life, peace, prosperity, food security. But how do we get there? We need leaders, visionary leaders, servant leaders, future farmers of Africa, right? 2100 is only 79 years away. I mean, someone who's 18 today in sub-Saharan Africa will be 97. So we want to go younger. We better hurry. This youth thing, again, I'm passionate about this. Okay, it's one solution. It's not just one solution. There are many, many, many ideas out there. I tend to be biased to this because I think you are the future. You are the young people. Let's empower you. And of course, this is a wonderful panel, and the ideas that came out of here and the questions give me hope. So I hope I've answered your question, Sarah.
Thank you, Walter, and so full of passion. So that was really moving and wonderful. We have a lot of comments and questions in the chat box around education. So this is a topic I know, Walter, that's resonating with many. Ola Wanmi writes a couple of times about the importance of education. How do we scale these education efforts? I think this is a major challenge that we're all thinking about. Ola Wanmi talks about the importance of success stories and how we share those success stories, and again, in a way that's scalable. And then there was an earlier comment in the chat about the role that mis and disinformation play in all of this. And those are all sort of caught up in this communications and education ball of wax that I wonder if any of you want to attack quickly before we move to some of the final comments in our event today. So I'm just going to throw this one out there to whoever feels compelled to address it.
I would just say, and maybe it's not taking on all of those topics, but I am literally just back from my very first mission, official mission in my role, just back from Guatemala on Sunday evening. And after having been in this role for 18 months, almost all of it, it seems, being affected by a national lockdown in Italy and the other COVID-19 restrictions, it was really important for me to make sure that for the work that I do in a leadership position at our headquarters, really to streamline, to make more efficient, to enable the work that happens at the country level. It was time to get to the field and to be able to really see the kind of work that, to Walter's example, I mean, of having worked in Angola and really understanding how our different organizations work together, how we really, truly on the ground support farmers, their families, indigenous communities, rural communities. And I think probably where I'm going with this, Sarah, is that I came back, well, first so inspired and so committed to keep, plugging away at headquarters to make the work of our field and country offices and those that we serve, more streamlined. But more than anything, I felt like we probably aren't telling enough of these success stories. I think we maybe capture them in a local setting, but I think sometimes up at the global level, we even miss the opportunity to be bigger advocates and bigger storytellers of, I think the progress that is being made while we're looking at these global trends. And I did say we're off track for, all of these higher level goals that we're trying to achieve. at a very personal level, there's such inspiring work and change that is coming to the way people live, to their, economic stability and their prosperity, and to the ways that we're trying to bring new tools around climate mitigation and adaptation. And I don't think we personalize and share those stories as broadly and as boldly as we likely should. And so I hope that that's something that FAO, again, even beyond our country office structure, that we can elevate some of these narratives and really, I think, share more about the really innovative solutions, but then their impact. It's about the impact. It's the so what. It's not so much this tool or that tool. It's how did it make a difference in someone's life? How did it change the way we have been operating? And so I think that's something that I would really hope that we can see us all commit to a bit more.
Thanks so much, Beth. I'm going to ask one more question, a quick rapid fire round for each of you as panelists, and then we're going to hear from our host, Matt Murray, again. We've covered a lot of territory in the last hour and a half. We're coming to the end of our time together, and I want to close really with a narrow focus on the topic of the session today. So to each of you, in 30 seconds or less, agroecology and biotechnology, can we have the best of both worlds? And agro-eco biotechnology, if you will, can we reconcile the differences and find complementarity? And I'm going to start with you, Walter. I'm going to move then to you, Beth, and we'll end with Naseed. So Walter, can these two concepts get along? 30 seconds or less.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, I think they can. And this is going to be a dynamic process. It's not going to be set in stone today. Society, the future generations are going to evolve with these issues and modify them and shape them and make them work better as the context is changing. So I have hope that they're going to work together.
Thank you, Walter. Beth, agroecology, biotechnology, can we get along?
Yes, but we have to work at it. And I think that's the power of the conversation today. And that's where, for us, we again see our role as a convener and a facilitator to bring organizations and people and groups and governments who have different opinions to a table together, to a session together, so that we can actually, I think, talk more about the different points of view. And I think in some ways, if we do that, we'll find that there are more similarities than there are differences in what we're trying to achieve. So yes.
Thanks, Beth. All right, and final words go to the future of food and agriculture. Our youth representative, Naseed Maguana. Can we get along?
Absolutely, Sarah. And I would say I like how you even re-engineered the term agroeco-biotechnology. And to me, these two are reconcilable. They were never irreconcilable. And the starting place for us, in whichever way we want to modify agroecology, is to restore the place of science in it. That is where it came from. Let's not forget.
Thank you so much, Naseeb, and thank you to all of the participants for such a rich chat. I haven't seen such a rich chat in most of the Zoom meetings and WebEx meetings I've been in. So thank you all for your participation. Thank you, panelists. Thank you to the State Department for the opportunity to be here today. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Matt Murray for some final remarks. Thank you all.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you so much to all of our speakers for this thought-provoking discussion on this very incredibly timely and pertinent topic. Really enjoyed it, and I would agree with you, Sarah, that was one of the most engaging conversations I've heard through these virtual formats. So it was our honor to be able to host this discussion and to engage on this topic. I found the discussion really enlightening, and hope it illuminated, for many of the folks joining, all the connections that can be made between agroecology and biotechnology as we work towards these goals to mitigate climate change, adapt its effects, and promote sustainable agriculture. I also thought for myself it was incredibly instructive for those of us who are policymakers to hear the panelists' views on how to engage different groups and the importance of engaging different groups, including some of the points that were made about young people or about women, as well as the very important points about engaging entrepreneurs or engaging small businesses. Very, very helpful, I know, for myself at the State Department and for our team here, and I'm sure for others as well. I'm especially grateful to Naseed and Walter for highlighting some of these challenges and opportunities to engage different groups from their perspective, both in academia and in the field, which I thought was really, really helpful. And I also want to emphasize as we close a point that Beth made, which I think is really important, which is the importance of success stories to highlight the progress that we're making. My team at the State Department knows that I'm also a strong proponent of sharing success stories, celebrating success when we can, and looking ahead to things that we can do together. Because it's really through these stories that we can help advance a positive agenda to address the challenges we face. And that's what the Borlaug Dialogue is all about. And that's why we're spending the time that we're spending this week. And so really grateful for that point, Beth. That was terrific. So really, on behalf of the State Department, I really want to thank you again for attending today's event. And we hope that you'll continue to consider what we discussed today as we approach tomorrow's official kickoff of the 2021 Borlaug Dialogue. And I hope to see many of you in Des Moines later this week. So thanks very much.
Thank you all. Signing off. Bye-bye.